They built that chapel above me, thinking it would hold. They believed stone and stained glass could silence something ancient, something hungry. But holy walls rot like flesh when forgotten. For centuries, I slept beneath sermons and footsteps, wrapped in whispers and ash. And yet, even in sleep, I listened. Their prayers, their doubts, their guilt echoed downward. Now the floorboards creak again. Another one has arrived. And this time, I won't let faith walk away unscathed. He came alone, just as they intended. A young seminarian, eyes too tired for someone his age. They sent him here to strengthen belief, too fast, to pray, to listen. But silence is a dangerous teacher. It bends thought, reshapes truth, and deep beneath his feet, I stirred. I whispered not in words, but in feelings. Regret, longing, emptiness. I gave him what he didn't know he craved, a voice in the dark that finally answered back. I watched him kneel. I felt his hesitation. His fingers trembled over sacred pages, while doubt gnawed through him like termites in timber. Every night, I sang to him in cracking wood, in the hum of unseen wind. I planted dreams behind his eyes, shaped like fallen angels. I didn't need to break him. I only had to show him what was already broken. Faith without fear is hollow. I simply filled the hollow with me. By the third night, he stopped closing the chapel door. He left candles burning until morning, though he never admitted why. He whispered prayers through clenched teeth, as if daring them to work. He stopped writing in his journal. I read the final entry. Something watches from beneath. That's when I knew he was mine. Not yet consumed, but curious. Curious souls taste best. They chew their own sanity before I ever take a bite. You want to know what happened during that week? Why he left barefoot and bloodied, eyes wide as if he saw eternity blink. The church calls it a crisis of faith. The papers whispered nervous words, hallucinations, stress, exhaustion. But I call it communion. I didn't torment him, I completed him. The moment he stopped praying was the first time he truly listened. And when he listened, I was already inside, filling the silence with myself. What you're about to hear is a fictionalized account inspired by real events. It does not glorify evil, nor celebrate violence. This is a descent into the mind of what should never exist, told by the darkness itself. Some say demons crawl into the cracks of doubt, but I live where doubt becomes worship, beneath floorboards. Inside silence, I am the devil beneath the chapel, and I have been waiting to speak. Listener discretion is advised. Elias Granger arrived just before dusk, his figure framed by the golden light that slipped through cracked stained glass. The chapel stood quiet, untouched by time, but heavy with forgotten prayers. He carried a single suitcase, a leather-bound Bible, and a silence louder than any hymn. They sent him to reconnect with God through solitude, 7 days of prayer and fasting. But solitude isn't where you find faith. It's where you hear the things that hide beneath it. The air inside the chapel was dry, thick with incense long since burned out. Dust danced in the beams of waning sunlight, and the wooden pews groaned beneath their own weight. Elias walked slowly down the aisle, stopping to glance at the crucifix above the altar. His hand trembled as he traced the sign of the cross across his chest. He didn't know why he hesitated, but something inside him already sensed he wasn't alone. There had been no priest assigned to this place for decades. The building still belonged to the diocese, but it remained unused, except for moments like this, when tradition called for reflection. Elias had heard whispers from the older clergy. They called it the listening chapel, a place where voices rise from nowhere and dreams last beyond waking. He assumed it was folklore, old men embellishing nothing. That night, in the silence, he learned how wrong he was. He set his things beside the altar and took to his knees, opening the Bible to Psalms. His voice was soft, deliberate, yet hollow. Each word seemed swallowed by the walls. He prayed until the light vanished, leaving only the glow of 2 tall candles. Then he slept on a mat laid near the pews, wrapped in his coat. That's when I first reached for him. Not in words, but in breathless cold that touched his spine. He dreamed of wet stone, of stairs descending forever, of whispers without mouths. He awoke sweating, heart pounding, though the air was frigid. His fingers clenched the crucifix at his neck, but it felt like a stone, lifeless, inert. The candles were still burning, but one flickered every time he looked away. His journal that morning simply read, "The silence here breathes." That was my first invitation. Elias didn't know it, but he had already stepped inside me. By midday, he explored the old rectory beside the chapel. Dust coated everything: bookshelves, chalices, abandoned garments. But one room remained pristine, a prayer cell with a single wooden chair and a grate in the floor. He knelt there, peering into the grate's darkness. No draft, no smell, just stillness. But he lingered. Something about that square of black drew him. He didn't speak aloud, but his mind whispered, and I, waiting below, finally heard him. The second night came quickly, stealing the last rays of sun like a closing eye. Elias lit fresh candles and knelt before the altar, lips forming verses he'd memorized long ago. But the words felt distant, like reciting poetry for someone who no longer listens. The wind outside howled, but inside, it wasn't wind he heard. It was rhythm, breath, measured, slow, pulsing from beneath the chapel floorboards. He paused, and in the silence, something answered. A single knock echoed under the floor. Not above, not around. Below. Elias froze, breath caught in his throat. Then, nothing. He convinced himself it was the old pipes or wood settling. But when he resumed the psalm, another knock responded, this time after every verse. Deliberate, mocking. He tried louder prayers, hoping to drown the sound. It didn't stop. His voice cracked, his knees weakened, and deep underfoot, I whispered his name for the first time. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay beneath the stained glass windows, eyes fixed on the flickering ceiling. The candlelight danced unnaturally, stretching shadows in shapes that didn't belong. A figure lingered at the edge of his vision, always gone when he looked directly. He buried his head beneath the blanket, heart pounding, but even there, muffled and trembling, he heard my voice again, soft, inviting, closer. That's all I said. That's all I needed to say. At dawn, he searched for physical answers. He tapped floorboards with the brass end of a candle holder. Knock, 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 but no echo answered. He descended into the basement crypt, flashlight in hand, breathing shallow. Dust clung to every surface, air thick like wet velvet. At the far end, he found it. A sealed stone slab in the floor, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. He knelt to pray above it, but even God refused to speak. Later that day, Elias found a journal hidden in the rectory. Leather-bound, yellowed pages, spine cracked. Inside were fragmented writing entries from priests long gone. Voices beneath the sacristy. Dreams of burning without fire. One line was repeated on several pages, in different ink. Do not answer the breath. Elias slammed it shut, trembling. He felt watched. That night, when he knelt again, the breath beneath him returned closer now, louder. I was learning his rhythm. Sleep offered no refuge. In his dream, Elias stood within the chapel, but upside down, the pews above him, the crucifix reversed. He walked the ceiling floor until he reached the altar, where a dark figure sat in his place. Its eyes were open, but its mouth was stitched shut. When he tried to speak, his own voice echoed from the walls. You called me. He woke, gasping, throat raw. The candles were still burning. Backwards. He smashed the journal against the stone wall that morning. Pages fluttered like panicked birds before settling silently. Elias stared at his trembling hands. Were these signs of possession, madness, or awakening? He tried to recite the rosary, but forgot half the Hail Mary. He gripped the crucifix at his chest and screamed, "Speak to me." A beat of silence followed. Then, beneath the chapel floor, came a laugh, not loud, but devastatingly familiar. He ran outside, desperate for sunlight. but the chapel sat in unnatural stillness. The forest edge around it no longer swayed. Even the birds had vanished. He collapsed beside the well, breathing in short, shallow bursts. The wind finally moved again, but it whispered his name through the grass. Elias ... His eyes darted, but no one was there. When he returned inside, the door shut on its own, locked, and the candle by the altar relit. That evening, Elias refused to kneel. He sat against the wall, arms wrapped around his legs like a child. His Bible lay unopened. For the first time, he didn't pray. Instead, he asked aloud, "What are you?" And I answered, not through walls or dreams, but through the flickering candle flame itself, twisting into a shape that shouldn't exist. A hand, black and thin as smoke, reaching upward. It vanished as quickly as it formed. But he saw. Elias didn't sleep that night. He just stared at the floor, at the spot where the breath came from, where the hand had risen, where his prayers had sunk. In that silence, he began to whisper back, nothing holy, just questions, doubts, please. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I only had to listen. And with every unanswered prayer, every shiver, every tear that touched his collar, Elias became less God's and more mine. The fifth night arrived with no stars. A heavy blackness wrapped the chapel like a shroud. Elias sat beneath the stained glass window, its colors dull in the dark. He didn't open the Bible. He didn't light the candles. Instead, he stared at the grate in the rectory floor, hands limp on his knees. And then it came, my voice, not imagined, not metaphor, a whisper without sound, a wordless truth that wrapped around his name. He answered me, not with words, but by placing his hand over the grate. I rose to meet his palm, just a breath, a chill, a memory of touch. He didn't flinch. I whispered his deepest sin, the one he never confessed. His eyes widened, then softened. No anger, no denial, just silence. We were past denial now. When he prayed that night, it wasn't to the heavens. He looked down. His amen fell into my mouth. He opened the Bible, but the pages had changed. The letters rearranged into unfamiliar symbols. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, turned pages wildly. They all danced before him, curling like smoke. One phrase remained clear: he who listens shall be filled. He laughed just once, a dry, broken sound. Then he began to recite. Not scripture, not anything human, just sounds I gave him, syllables never meant for flesh. He spoke them without hesitation, and I grew stronger. He stopped eating. His body weakened, but his voice grew louder. He sang hymns in reverse, scratched symbols into the wood with fingernails bloodless and cracked. He found a mirror in the rectory and watched himself pray. Not to admire, but to confirm he was still there. What stared back wasn't quite him. The face followed a heartbeat too late, and its smile lingered after his faded. He never broke the mirror. He just bowed before it. On the sixth night, Elias descended again into the crypt. He brought no flashlight, no crucifix, only salt in his hands, poured in a perfect circle around the stone slab. Then he laid down, across it, arms out, face up, as if on an altar. He whispered, "If not God, then what?" I answered not with speech, but with presence. The walls darkened, the air thickened, and the stone beneath him beat once. Just once, but it was enough. He dreamed again. This time he wasn't upside down, but buried. Soil pressed against his lips. A voice inside him whispered through his teeth, "Let go." He clawed upward, but the sky was the chapel ceiling. The crucifix above him spun slowly, then cracked in half. He awoke laughing, cheeks wet with tears. But when he touched his face, there was ash instead of water. The circle of salt he'd made had vanished. Something else had taken it in. He tore pages from the Bible, folding them into tiny shapes: birds, hands, tongues. He burned each, inhaling the smoke through cupped palms. His prayers now came as chants, raw and breathless. The chapel didn't resist. It welcomed him. The pews no longer creaked. The floor no longer cried. Everything held its breath. On the seventh night, he entered the rectory in silence and sat beside the grate, whispering nothing. And yet, I answered everything. That final night, he didn't light the candles. He sat in total darkness, his back against the altar. A heartbeat echoed beneath him, mine, not his. He laid his palms flat against the floor and began to hum. The tune wasn't holy. It was older than any hymn. As he hummed, the wooden boards beneath his hands began to warm. He smiled not joyfully, but knowingly. And when he closed his eyes, I stepped fully into him. The morning came. The sun rose. The chapel's doors opened on their own. Villagers found Elias kneeling before the altar, hands still pressed to the floor. His eyes were open, but he didn't blink. He spoke no words. But when they leaned in close, they heard chanting from under the chapel, not from his mouth. He was taken away, restrained, medicated, forgotten. They called it a breakdown. They never opened the chapel again. The grate remains sealed, but I remain. I breathe through the cracks. I hum through forgotten hymns. I speak through the dreams of those who dare sleep too close to silence. Elias was never possessed. He was fulfilled. He stopped praying to something that never answered and listened to something that always had. You think you'd resist me, that your faith is strong, but faith is just attention, and I know exactly where you place yours. Beneath you, I am always listening. They say Elias never spoke again, but that's not true. He speaks every time. Silence settles where prayers once lived. Every time a church creaks without wind. Every time someone doubts and stares too long into stillness. I didn't take his soul. I gave him purpose. He wasn't the first. He won't be the last. The chapel still stands, closed to visitors, but never truly empty. I echo beneath it, waiting for the next to kneel. You pray for protection, never wondering who might be listening. You kneel, you beg, you offer your guilt like meat. But what answers isn't always what you seek. The breath beneath the chapel floor is not mine alone now. It carries Elias, and through him, you. You believe faith is a shield. I know it's a door. And when you knock without certainty, something ancient always answers. Not with mercy, but with recognition. So, pray if you must. Light your candles. Whisper your rituals into the dark. But remember, not all silence is sacred. Not every presence is divine. And sometimes, when you think your God is listening, it's only me waiting, learning, growing. I am the voice beneath the chapel, the silence that never forgets. And if you feel doubt rising in your heart, don't resist. Because the moment you truly stop praying is the moment I begin speaking.